Children, what is something you found out about your parents that you never told them about? When I was around 10, my father came storming into my room and stiff-armed me into the wall. He screamed in my face through tear-filled, angry eyes. "What did you do to it?" I had no idea what he was talking about. He dragged me into the bathroom and pointed at a box of Arm & Hammer used to deodorize the bathroom. Still screaming, his hand squeezing the back of my neck so hard I thought he was going to snap my neck. I still pled ignorance. No clue what he was talking about. He threw me in my room and barricaded the door with a large dresser so I couldn't get out, even though it was a pull. He left me in there for 3 days. No food, nothing. I was terrified. He never explained why he did what he did or what he was talking about. Found out later when my much older cousin confessed at a family Christmas party that she had broken into our home and stole my dad and stepmom's booger sugar stash that they hid in the Arm & Hammer. She said this like it was a funny family story. So my dad locked me up during a bender and almost killed me in the process. I'm now a dad and don't speak to my parents at all. Screw them. Found out the reason we were so poor growing up was because both my parents had a drinking and booger sugar issue. We always had a house, food, health insurance, and clothes. But a few years without Christmas and birthdays happened. We almost lost the house once. My parents were pretty high functioning for addicts to keep us. Oh well. I didn't know my dad had a wife before my mother until I was 18. I know that my mother is a convicted felon. Not my parents, but still my family. I also know my grandfather had an illegitimate child with my aunt. I put 2 and 2 together. My aunt is my mother's sister. My uncle is her son, but my mother's brother. And my cousin is my aunt's child. My uncle's siblings and my mother's niece. It was later confirmed by the other side of the family. My mother doesn't know that I know. But how did you find out your mother was a convicted criminal? Was it like a Wikipedia search? Did you Google then, eh? I always thought my father had a very small appetite. He'd eat a few bites of a meal and declare he was full. When I hosted my first big Thanksgiving in my house with my fiancé, my father put away 3 pounds of potatoes, a whole pie, and more than half the turkey by himself. My mother remarked how he'd had a bottomless stomach since they were kids. I was telling my fiancé later that night how oddly the remark struck me considering his track record. My fiancé explained to me my father wasn't eating so there'd be enough to go around for me, my sister, and mother. I know their bank and budget details. My parents were raised never to talk about money. It was considered improper, which is not great when it comes to learning budgets, etc. Google saved my wallet. When I was real young, we didn't have much of it, and I'm sure that influences that attitude too. My father was forced to retire. Job qualifications were changed on him. More school versus early retirement after working for this one job his entire life. Mom had a government-funded job that got cut this year. I was worried about their finances. I wasn't planning on helping them out for at least another decade, and I've been anxious about them. Accidentally overheard them debating some stuff while visiting for Christmas. His 401k is okay, and it turns out he did get his pension. It's just reduced. Going to keep an eye on their needs, but I think they're going to be okay, minus any emergencies. My mother was bad touched as a kid by my grandfather. For the most part, she's normal, but she has some emotional issues and bouts of depression. My grandfather died before I was born. My grandmother and mother never talk about him, and I've never seen a picture of him. Honestly, I don't even know his name. My aunts told me one day when I asked why nobody talks about him when I was older. I think that's a pretty damn good reason to never bring someone up in conversation or even tell future generations in the family that person's name. They'd be dead to me too. In like an emotional way on top of the already literal way, I mean. My dad would always tell my little brother and I about this Russian girlfriend he had when he was younger. What he very conveniently left out, however, is that they got married so that she could have citizenship. Thank you, Ancestry.com. He still has no idea that I know anything about it. The circumstances of my parents' divorce. I was 10 when they separated, and they never really told us why. Just that their marriage wasn't working anymore. I didn't really care, so I didn't ask, but over the next few years I would eavesdrop on bits and pieces of conversations they had and eventually put the pieces together. Basically, my mom cheated on my dad with my now stepdad. My mom and now stepdad worked at the same high school and my mom had taught each of his kids. When my dad became suspicious, he put a keylogger in the family computer in her phone and found some suspicious texts, emails, searches, etc. He hired a PI who followed my mom to the airport one day and struck struck up a conversation with her. My mom took the bait and ended up confessing everything to the PI under the impression it was some random stranger. I was introduced to my now stepdad a little under a year after they separated, but didn't meet any of his children or family until a few years later. Turns out he was having an affair as well, but was introduced to me by my brothers while he was still with his wife. I don't think any of my parents know that I know this, and it's not something I would ever bring up with them. I love all my parents and step-parents the same, and although they all did some crappy things, they all seem much happier now than they were when they were married to one another. When I was around 10 to 11, I went through a really rough patch emotionally. The substances I was getting for my ADHD started messing with me really bad, and that combined with regular prepubescent angst turned me into quite the little butthole. I started getting into a lot of fights in school and was generally an emotional wreck. I'd get so mad I couldn't express it and would instead just be a douche to everyone around me. One night I was on the couch with my eyes closed, basically being quiet for the first time in months. And I heard my mom say to my brother that raising me was just really hard and that sometimes she wished I was just someone else's problem. I know she was just tired and frustrated, but I've never forgotten that, and I've also never confronted her about it. My mom was cheating on my dad. That's a huge reason why they split. She very quickly remarried and popped out my brother. It wasn't until I was an adult that I did the math and realized she was pregnant by her second husband and still married to my father. My parents started going through a messy divorce when I was in middle school. It was a big mix of things which ended it. According to my dad, my mom was a secret alcoholic and would often pick my brother and I up from school while drunk. When my dad found out, we would randomly get picked up by a friend's parents and they would watch us while my dad made my mom sober up. My dad likes to exaggerate, so I have no idea how much she drank, or if she was just having a couple drinks with lunch. Either way, my mom doesn't know that I know she picked us up from school drunk. She's definitely not an alcoholic now. She keeps the booze front and center in the house now, and it always goes down at a reasonable rate. For my dad, when the divorce was final, he completely shut down. He became a recluse and wouldn't talk to anyone outside of work. He felt like he lost all of his friends in the divorce, but I could tell something else was bothering him. He never really recovered from the divorce and still only interacts with me, my brother, and his siblings. The divorce was finalized about 8 years ago. I was talking with my uncle, my dad's youngest brother, who roomed with him in college. Saying how worried I was about Dad being lonely as he approaches 60, my uncle told me to never tell him I know. But apparently my dad was engaged to another woman when he was in college. They had been engaged for 6 months when my dad contracted gonorrhea from his fiancée. Turns out she had been cheating on him for years with the rest of the football team. I guess he never recovered from that, because it explains a lot of his controlling behavior and his distrust of anyone but a blood relative. I always want to tell him I know and that it's okay for him to talk to me about what happened, but I also don't want to betray my uncle's trust and ruin one of my dad's last good relationships. He recently found out his sister and mother were keeping a small secret from him and threatened to never speak to them again. He has a lot of trust issues and abhors being lied to. I found out my dad had been cheating on my mother for most of their marriage with a large number of different women over the years by following Wireshark tutorials on hack forums as a teenager. We're a middle-class suburban family and I have 3 siblings. My dad does all the work and my mom is a stay-at-home mom without a lot of payable skills. Telling my mom would ruin her and the family. They would either divorce or my mom would stay quiet to keep the quality of life for her children. Either one has no positives for me, my mother, or my siblings. My youngest brother is graduating high school soon and the rest of us have moved out. I have a very large amount of evidence compiled, and I'm planning on anonymously giving it to her in a few months. I can't lie, I don't envy this man, the situation he's in, or the decisions that he is making. I would not want anything to do with this. I mean, good luck with that. My aunt and uncle stopped talking to my parents when I was about 10 years old up until I was 18 and I reconnected with my cousin, their son. It hurt my parents that my mom's brother and his wife stopped talking to them for, as far as my parents were concerned, no reason. When me and my cousin became friends, our parents started talking again. Once I was talking to my cousin about it and he told me that his parents stopped talking to mine because my parents didn't buy big enough presents for my cousins, even though they were well off and my parents at the time were pretty broke. I've hated them ever since, though. I would never tell my parents this, as it would hurt their feelings, but F you, Steve, and F you, Lorraine, for being a pair of materialistic little douches. Also, Lorraine, my cousin told me that he walked in on you doing it with another guy, so you're also a cheating harlot. Have a nice life, buttholes. I went through the DirecTV history on my parents' TV. I wanted to find the name of a show my father kept telling me he loved so I could buy him DVD copies. Instead, I found a bunch of GGW PPVs. My father, the man who taught me how to illegally download media, buys his smut through pay-per-view on his cable provider. I was so embarrassed I could never bring myself to tell him. I'm terrified he might have to commit the Irish Catholic version of seppuku. My dad thinks my mom is insane. He regrets his entire relationship they had since they were teenagers. That's not it, though. My dad is even more messed up than my mom. He has serious emotional issues. Being in prison tamed him in the sense that he doesn't feel in the position to act on his impulses, but he has them still. I see it. My mom and dad had an abuser-victim codependent relationship made in hell. She says she stayed for the kids, but the whole reason why she had us in the first place is because she was trying to chain a man to look after her. She is incapable of taking care of herself to this day. My dad thinks I'm exactly like her. He also won't say that. He really doesn't like me, and I used to be scared he would do something to me, but he won't do anything now because 1, he's old and needs someone to take care of him. He knows his wife would leave him in a heartbeat. Contrary to my mom, she doesn't actually need him. 2, I am diagnosed mentally ill, and as far as he's concerned, I am totally crippled, which pretty much guarantees that I'll either stay by his side until he dies or will run to the first douche that can financially support me. They don't know that I know why they did all of that. It's pretty sad. They are both so afraid of being old and alone. We were apparently much better off than I knew when I was a kid. I never thought we were poor because we didn't go without the basics, but I was constantly told we couldn't afford things my mom just didn't want to spend the money on, so I was in the hand-me-downs from church members until high school. Wasn't allowed extracurriculars that had added costs, so no sports or Girl Scouts, that sort of thing. When I started working in high school at 14, my parents stopped paying for pretty much everything except my health and car insurance. I bought my own food, clothes, phone, etc. Never mind that my younger brother got to do anything he wanted and mom still pays for his car payments. Definitely not the end of the world, but it gave me a weird complex and I still have troubles budgeting and rationalizing extra purchases. Maybe some parents in the world are just fine with being really open about who their favorite kid is in extreme ways. Or maybe your mom woke up on the wrong side of the bed the day you were born and they've just been internalizing that anger for your entire existence. I ain't got a clue, but you certainly have my sympathies. When I was 15, I was broke and looking around the house for spare change. I was home alone at the time. I looked in my parents' room and found a metal box with a padlock on it. My curiosity got the best of me and I looked around for the key. I found it and unlocked the box. There were letters and a journal inside, written by my mom. They were what she wrote in for therapy. It turns out my mother had 3 miscarriages before having me. I have an older brother and we're 7 years apart. I don't think he knows yet. I don't want to tell him, really. The letters made me cry my eyes out. I'm a mama's boy. All 3 of the miscarriages were going to be girls. She wanted a daughter named Mary Catherine. After she had me, she had to have surgery and was infertile afterwards. I always felt sorry for my mother since then. If I get married and have a daughter, I think I'm gonna name her Mary Catherine. I don't like being accusatory, but what were you going to do if that lockbox had money in it? I wanted to record a video for YouTube. I was covering songs and wanted to do a bit of a higher quality video this time. I knew my dad had a cool old camcorder somewhere, so I decided to poke around to find it. I find it under my parents' bed and think sarcastically, what if they had an SX tape on here, LOL. My parents are not the type, I thought, to do something like that. And it seems so, movie cliche. So my dumb butt rewinds the video and I'm confronted with my mother's woo-ha taking up the whole screen. Mentally scarred, I close the camcorder and shuffle back downstairs, trying my best to forget that horrendous mistake. They've got no idea I saw that. My dad was drunk once and told me my mom was boring in bed. This was a couple years after they divorced due to him finding another woman. Still, gee, thanks, Dad. I didn't need to know. My dad left his emails open one day, and with me being a snoopy 9-year-old, I had a look. Turns out when he visited his home country, he had an affair with his ex-girlfriend and was now having asexual conversations with her. I never told my mother, but 3 days later I was notified that they were getting a divorce. I know my mother is scamming money from a pension she should no longer be getting. She also took hundreds of pounds worth me and my brother were entitled to until we were 18. Both moved out at 17. And to top it off, she then took mine, not my brother's, only mine, bank fund my father put away for me before he died. They have a lovely car and home and excess money, and when I asked them for help, they never did. My brother asked and he got to move back home and got invited round for dinners. I know I was treated differently because I had a daughter and my stepdad hates kids. I found out my dad was a paranoid schizophrenic one night when I overheard my grandma praying for him. She thought I was asleep. I was like 16, but genuinely thought that his behavior was the most normal thing in the world since I had grown up with it. I cried myself to sleep that night. I did some research on it not long after since I didn't know too much about schizophrenia and was so traumatized when I realized how messed up he was. I don't know if it was by chance or because I started noticing things, but he became unbearably worse after, and me and him started fighting really badly. My mom finally told him to leave the house, and they had a really messy divorce. I still feel guilty about fighting with him to this day and wonder if things would be better if I had never found out. He lives alone now and isn't allowed contact with any of us. It wasn't originally like that. My siblings used to go and visit him, and he started electrocuting them so nobody could hear their thoughts. I feel so guilty when I think of him, living alone without any family around him. I've never told anyone that I found out through my grandma, but my mom still has never spoken to me about it. Now that I look back on things, I'm 24 now, I realize that she was being emotionally abused by him. It was just so normal to us, we never even realized. I know my mom used to do booger sugar and may have been to rehab. It's super weird because she and my dad became hardcore evangelicals before I was born, and my mom has never alluded to her previous lifestyle. It's kind of annoying because throughout my teen years, she acted like my curiosity about everything was just wrong, and she didn't understand why I would think to involve myself in it. She always acted better than me, and I know she would be really mad if she knew that I knew. Some people are just really weird and can't accept or let other people know that they at some point have made mistakes in their life. A laptop that was handed down from my dad to me and then to my sister had some disturbing court documents buried real deep about my real mom on it. It was regarding the custody battle, and there were numerous accounts of our mom trying to cause physical harm on us. We were too young to remember any of it, but one of them was about how my mom drove our Bronco into a lake with my sister in it. She wasn't even 2 at the time. I always wondered where that car went. Both my sister and I have just never said anything because we know how hard it was and how long it took for our dad to get custody, and the amount of crap he went through we'll probably never understand. My dad wasn't a virgin when he married my mom, even though she thinks he was. I also know he's cheated on her twice, at least. All of my siblings know as well, but none of us have told her. She's completely against divorce because of her religion, so it wouldn't make her leave. She'd just be miserable. Well, more miserable than she already is with him. Got a whole lot of infidelity going on here in this topic, and on the ones that I haven't read, a lot of hardcore you don't want to know fetishes. I'm the eldest, but only because of something that had happened to the one before me. My old aunt called me his name before correcting herself and telling me a bit. When she realized I actually didn't know, she shut up and wouldn't say another word. All I know is that my entire family knows, but they refuse to tell me anything. And they tell me to drop it because it was some traumatic event that my parents don't ever want to talk about. My dad apparently gave my uncle on my mum's side a black eye just for mentioning it, and Dad's pretty calm and cool-headed. I'm 19, my brother is 17, he doesn't know, and this will be a mystery until the day they die and I can dig out the information from someone else. I found love letters from my dad to my mum. I read 1 or 2 sentences. The one that sticks with me is he said he wanted to pour champagne all over her body. Then thought, holy crap, this is personal and gross, and put them back. The sad thing is they frickin' hate each other now. My father passed before I was born. Just yesterday, a buddy was telling me he was able to go back 6 generations using the Find a Grave website to find out his ancestors' names. I thought cool, as I've never met my father's father and didn't know he was still alive. I share his name. I find my father's page, but unfortunately there's no link for parents like my friend's relatives had. Bummer. I do notice, though, that there are several posts to his memorial page, so I go there. Apparently, my mom goes there at least monthly, sometimes more often, and posts how much she misses him and how she wishes he were still alive, etc. She has been with my stepfather, who for all purposes is my father, for many, many years. She lives in a different state and can rarely get to his actual grave. I never felt so sad for my mom as I did yesterday afternoon, but I'll never bring it up. I did call her, though, to chit-chat and gossip a bit, though. Check on your relatives regularly. Unless you've got beef with them, of course, in which case you do you. Not my parents, but my friend's parents. A long time ago, he had a few of us over for late-night games and pizza. My buddy Mike asked me to come into his parents' bedroom, which I thought was weird, but I'm 12, so who cares? He pulls open the bottom drawer of a large dresser, and he takes out what I thought was an elephant mask. Turns out it's an electronic elephant head with a thong attached, and there's a little crevice in the elephant's trunk where you can put your you-know-what, and when the mask is turned on, the trunk moves up and down as it makes elephant noises. Not that it really bothers bothered me, but I never looked at his dad the same again. A huge part of why I left home was because of a call I heard from my mom. When I was in high school, my mom would pick me up after school from one of two places that sounded similar and started with the same letter. One day I went to the wrong place to be picked up, my grandmother's apartment, instead of a shopping center. My grandma, who always loved causing fights in our family, took a call from my mom on speakerphone with me in the next room, where my mom called me a devil child, a worthless B-word, and said she never should have tried to get me back from child services after I was taken away because of her abuse. I knew she thought that about me, but it really helped me realize that all her talk about keeping fights in the nuclear family was so she could misrepresent my abuse to the extended family. I also realized that my mom must have done this fairly regularly if my grandma knew to have her on speakerphone instead of taking the call on a phone as normal. It pretty much solidified that my mom had no positive feelings for me and was only keeping me around to further abuse and manipulate. My dad lied to my family for 25 years about having fought in Vietnam. My whole life, he and my mother insisted that he had endured horrific traumas as a young man. However, after they got divorced, my mother mentioned this to his sister. His sister insisted that he had never been in combat and that he had spent his military career in Hawaii. She went so far as to have my father's ex-wife, who knew him at the time, call my mom and confirm that during that time, he was in Hawaii. Other bits and pieces began to make sense, and it became clear that he had lied to my mother about his experience in order to manipulate her. I've never told him that I know this because I'm worried he will lash out or maybe self-delete himself or something. At the end of the day, though, it is kind of a relief to know that he was never in any harm. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Linked in the description below.